Hi, my name's Anna Sterling. 6 months ago, my cousin decided to teach me a lesson. He stood in that elevator, smiled at me, and whispered, "Let's play a game of survival." Seconds later, my pacemaker alarm went dead. The nurses thought it was a glitch. My family thought I was overreacting. But I knew better. Someone had silenced my lifeline. What they didn't know was that the silence was recording everything, every word, every betrayal, every secret buried under the hospital floor. So now I have one question for you. How far would your own family go to see if you'd survive? The lobby hadn't changed. Still sterile. Still too bright. The smell of overbleached tile clung to the back of my throat the way grief had clung to me since the day Mom died here. I hated this place, hated the quiet way it tried to pretend nothing tragic had ever happened within these walls. But I wasn't here for memories. I was here because my pacemaker had begun acting like it didn't trust me anymore. Neither did anyone else. I approached the check-in desk with my hands shoved into the pockets of my jacket, gripping the hem of my sleeve like it might hold me together. "You're early," the nurse behind the counter said without looking up. "Habit," I replied, voice too soft. I cleared my throat. I had an episode a few nights ago. Shortness of breath. Chest tightening. Figured it was worth a check. She gave a polite nod, tapped something into her computer, and directed me to wait near the elevator. That's when I heard it, my name. Anna. I froze. Clayton's voice hadn't changed. It still had that confident, sing-song lilt. Like he was just thrilled to be alive. And somehow always more alive than the rest of us. I turned slowly. He stood a few feet away in a navy wool coat, scarf tucked just right, hair a little longer than I remembered, but his smile hadn't aged a day. It looked rehearsed, effortless. "I thought that was you," he said, stepping forward like we were long-lost friends, not a fractured family. "Didn't think you'd be here," I said. "Just visiting a colleague on the research wing," he replied, like it was all just coincidence. "What about you?" "Routine monitoring," I said flatly. "Pacemaker's been unpredictable." He raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at his lips. "Still high-strung, huh?" My jaw tightened. I looked away. He gestured toward the elevator. "Heading up." I nodded, reluctantly. "Well then," he said, pressing the call button. "Let's ride together. For old time's sake." I should have said no. But I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. So I stepped in beside him, keeping as much space as the small box would allow. The elevator doors closed. And the hum of machinery filled the silence between us. He leaned slightly against the wall, glancing at me with what I'm sure he thought was charm. "You know," he said after a beat, "you've always been the protected one." I blinked. "Excuse me." "In the family," he continued. "Mom adored you. Vera coddled you. Even Uncle James let you win every argument." My stomach turned. "You think being sick makes me privileged?" He chuckled. "No. I think being believed makes you dangerous." I didn't know what that meant, not yet. But I felt the weight of it settle on my chest like a stone. The lights flickered. It was just a moment, maybe less. But the air changed. The soft whir of the elevator slowed ever so slightly. I glanced at the floor panel. We weren't moving. Then he leaned closer, too close. "Let's play a game of survival," he whispered, just for me. I stared at him, my breath caught mid-lung. "I just turned it off," he added, backing away. The elevator jolted, resumed its upward crawl. My heart raced, not from the malfunction, but from what I didn't understand yet. When the doors opened, I stumbled out into the cardiac wing. The nurse at the desk asked if I needed help, but I just shook my head and kept walking. Inside my assigned room, I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, hands trembling, unsure if it was from fear or fury. I reached for my phone. Voicemail. Vera didn't answer. Of course she didn't. I looked around the room, walls painted in false calm, machines blinking in mock concern. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just begun. Something real. Something not even Clayton's smug grin could hide anymore. The beeping of my heart monitor settled into a steady rhythm, mocking the chaos under my skin. I pulled the blanket over my lap, sat up straighter, and stared at the closed door. And I stood there, wondering if the elevator wasn't the only thing that had gone dark. The hallway outside my room was quiet except for the squeak of wheels and the shuffle of nurses changing shifts. Evening light slid across the floor in faint strips, catching the edge of my shoe. I hadn't moved in 10 minutes. My eyes kept going back to the red numbers blinking on the heart monitor beside me, daring me to look away. I'd been staring so long that when the tone changed, just a slight stutter, it didn't register right away. Then the rhythm flatlined for the length of a breath. The screen went white for a second, then came back alive. I hit the call button. A nurse rushed in, hair pulled tight, badge swinging. What happened? The alarm, I said, voice shaking but steadying as I spoke. It stopped. For 3 seconds. She glanced at the monitor, tapped twice on the screen, and smiled like a teacher correcting a child. False alarm. These machines throw phantom codes all the time. No, I said quietly. It didn't sound wrong. It sounded disconnected. She adjusted the clip on my finger. Honey, the system's clean. Nothing's off. Try to relax. When she left, she took something with her, the fragile thread of safety I'd been clinging to since the elevator. I watched her walk down the hall, laughing with another nurse before disappearing behind the glass doors. The wind outside had picked up. I could see the shadows of branches scraping the window. Denver nights in October had that sharp kind of chill that slipped into your bones, even when you were wrapped in blankets. I reached for my phone again. Vera didn't answer. Her picture lit up the screen for a few seconds before voicemail kicked in. I almost hung up, then spoke anyway. Vera, something's wrong with the monitor. It shut off for a few seconds. The nurse said it's fine, but it's not. I waited for the beep to end before setting the phone down. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, more from frustration. When she finally called back, her tone was half concerned, half annoyed. You're overthinking again, Anna. I'm not overthinking. The alarm stopped. You know what that means. What it means, she said, drawing out each word, is that you're exhausted and need to rest. You've always been a little sensitive. Mom was the same. That word hit harder than the elevator. Sensitive. It was how they'd always brush me off, when I questioned, when I doubted, when I begged them to listen. Good night, Vera, I said, hanging up before she could turn the knife. I tried to breathe in rhythm with the steady tone beside me, but my chest felt tight. The minutes passed too slowly, each second stretching until the sound of footsteps broke the stillness again. This time it wasn't a nurse. It was a man in a white coat with kind eyes and a clipboard. Miss Sterling. Yes. I'm Dr. Garvey. I was asked to stop by. He sat on the edge of the visitor's chair, smiling in a way that told me he thought he was being gentle. They've mentioned you've had a stressful few weeks. They? Your cousin. Mr. Drexler. He said you've been having panic spells. I couldn't speak for a moment. Clayton. Again. Even when he wasn't in the room, he found a way to insert himself. I didn't ask for a psychiatrist, I said finally. He nodded, flipping a page. I understand. This is just precautionary. Routine. A quick chat about what's been happening. Routine, I repeated, tasting the word like something spoiled. My monitor fails for 3 seconds, and instead of investigating, they send someone to analyze my anxiety. Dr. Garvey folded his hands. We just want to make sure you're coping. You've been through quite a bit. You're right, I said, reaching for my bag. I have been. Which is why I log everything. He frowned slightly. Log? I unzipped the front pocket, pulling out a small silver flash drive. Every adjustment, every pulse irregularity. I used to write code for the firmware these devices run on. Old habits die hard. He hesitated. You've been recording your own pacemaker data. Yes. You can gaslight me, doctor, but not the data. I placed the flash drive in his hand. Run it. You'll see what happened. He didn't argue. He just stared at the drive like it was a bomb. I'll have IT take a look, he said at last. In the meantime, I suggest you get some rest. I'll rest, I said, when the system proves I'm wrong. After he left, I lay back, tracing the reflection of the overhead light on the metal railing of the bed. My heart felt steady again, but my thoughts didn't. Outside, the wind howled against the glass. I closed my eyes and tried to let the sound cover the silence between the beeps. Somewhere down the hall, a door clicked open, then shut softly. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I sat up, holding my breath. They stopped right outside my door. The handle moved slightly, once, twice, and then nothing. When I pressed the call button, no one came. Minutes later, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, that the pressure in my chest was just fear turning physical. But the monitor beside me blinked again, just once, a tiny flicker in the corner of the screen, like a heartbeat skipping for reasons it couldn't explain. I picked up my phone to record the timestamp. If the machine wanted to fail me, it would have to do it on the record. It was just a flicker, but it told me the system wasn't failing me. People were. 3 days. That's how long it had been since the flicker. Since I stopped expecting anyone else to do their job. The first night passed in quiet panic, me staring at the monitor, waiting for it to fail again. It didn't. But the second night, the screen glitched for a moment during a blood pressure check. This time, I didn't call anyone. I wrote it down. And by the third day, I'd already started organizing the timestamps by hand. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. By late afternoon, the storm outside had deepened, casting a gray hush across the windows. Snow gathered thick along the ledge, muting the sounds of the world outside. It was the kind of weather that kept people away, visitors, oversight, attention. Isolation wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a condition. And I was starting to understand just how useful that might be to someone like Clayton. I sat up straighter as the new shift nurse, Harper, stepped in, cheerful, clipboard in hand. Vitals time, she chirped. And then you can go back to watching bad daytime TV or whatever conspiracy podcasts keep you company. I smiled politely. She meant well. But I could hear the edge of something else beneath her friendliness, a touch of disbelief. The kind nurses develop after years of dealing with too many emotional patients. She pressed the monitor leads against my chest, checked the cuff on my arm, and watched the screen blink to life. Nothing irregular. No glitches. Nothing to panic about. Except I knew better now. Has anyone looked into the data from my monitor yet? I asked, keeping my tone even. She glanced up, eyes darting to her clipboard. Not sure. If something serious popped up, I'm sure someone would have told you. That answer landed harder than she probably meant. I forced a nod, thanked her, and watched her disappear out the door. Once alone, I slipped my phone from under my pillow and opened the secure app where I'd been manually logging everything. Every beep, every pause, every unexplained variance. It wasn't obsessive. It was insurance. At 6:37 p.m., my room's lights flickered, not the main ones, but the smaller overhead track that ran above the monitor. I made a note. That's when the door tablet lit up. I blinked. A message notification. No sender. No subject. Just a file. I hesitated for a second, then tapped to open. The video started grainy, time-stamped 3 nights earlier. It showed me lying in bed, eyes wide, hand pressing the call button. Then the screen stuttered. My body twitched. The monitor line went flat for 3 full seconds. And the nurses never came. I watched myself reach for the emergency cord, then give up. The footage ended with me curling into the blanket like I was trying to disappear. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with vindication. So I wasn't crazy. And someone out there wanted me to know I wasn't alone. My fingers moved before I could think. I downloaded the file. Backed it up to a private cloud. Saved it to a hidden folder within another folder, just like I used to do back when I worked on embedded security code for hospital devices. That part of me, the part that used to build fail-safes and protocols, wasn't dead. It had just been sleeping. I was about to shut the tablet down when the door opened again. A man in scrubs stepped inside, carrying a wheeled tray with some tech tools on top. Late 30s, a quiet demeanor, eyes like he didn't want to make too much contact. You Anara? He asked. Yes. I'm Warren. IT. I was asked to check your telemetry feed. By whom? He shrugged. Just said you reported a data freeze. I nodded slowly. You new here? On nights, mostly. He stepped closer, glanced around like he wasn't sure if we were being watched, then added, I used to follow your GitHub. You built the triage filter in that open-source patient monitor module. That was you, right? I stared at him. I haven't touched code in 2 years, I said. He smiled faintly. Still remember it. Smart stuff. There was a long pause. Then he placed a small thumb drive on the tray beside me. You didn't get this from me, he said. I didn't respond. Just looked at him. And he didn't wait for acknowledgement. He turned and walked out the door without saying another word. The silence he left behind wasn't the scary kind. It was full of something else, awareness. I picked up the drive. Small. Unmarked. Ordinary. I didn't plug it in immediately. First, I checked my window. Still snowing. No one outside. I turned off the main lights, left the bedside lamp on low, then opened the hospital tablet and connected the drive. It held a folder. Inside, raw log files. Screenshots of telemetry spikes. Email headers, internal ones, flagged with Clayton's initials. Nothing explosive. But enough to see that someone had been tracking my case and suppressing alerts. I sat back in bed, feeling both numb and hyper-aware. This wasn't about glitches. This wasn't just medical error. Someone had deliberately muted my warnings. Twice. And maybe more than just mine. I spent the next hour doing what I knew best, cataloging. Sorting. Building the narrative. I labeled each event with a timestamp. Logged the nurse rotation schedule from the past week. Noted the times Clayton had visited the hospital, on business. Highlighted the intervals when monitoring logs went mysteriously blank. At 10:43 p.m., I opened a new document. Subject line, Survival Log 1. I wrote, "This is not paranoia. This is process. If I'm quiet, it's because I'm building proof." Then I encrypted the document and saved it to a drive only I could unlock. When Vera texted that night, all she said was, "Maybe it's all in your head, sweetie." I didn't reply. The old me would have cried. The new me took a screenshot, timestamped it, and filed it under a folder labeled, Dismissals. I lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the machine beside me breathe in rhythm with my own chest. I knew better now. You don't yell when you're not being heard. You document. And this time, I wasn't alone in the dark. The snowstorm had settled in for good. By the second day, it buried the sidewalks outside Reedridge, and the few people who braved the cold moved like ghosts behind the thick hospital glass. No visitors were allowed in or out. It should have felt safer that way, sealed off, but instead, it felt like a trap made of quiet and neon light. I hadn't slept. I'd spent most of the night reviewing the files Oren had slipped me, one by one, until the blue light from the tablet made my eyes ache. At some point near dawn, I started replaying something else in my head, Clayton's voice. It always came back in fragments, like a bad recording. That voice was arrogant but playful, charming in the kind of way that made people lower their guard. I remembered the night he proved that better than anyone. It was just before the lockdown started, in the hospital lounge, a so-called family night organized by the nurses. We'd been told it would help me relax, to see familiar faces. Instead, it became another test I didn't know I was taking. It started harmlessly enough. Vera sat by the vending machines on her tablet, pretending to listen. A few cousins played cards near the windows, joking about the weather. Clayton arrived late, coat unbuttoned, grinning like he owned the place. He handed out coffee cups and patted my shoulder. "You holding up, Anara?" he asked, too loudly, so everyone could hear. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." He laughed, dropping into a chair across from me. "You always say that. Even when you were a kid, you'd be falling apart and swearing you were fine. Maybe that's your thing." A cousin chuckled. Someone else murmured agreement. I tried to steer the conversation back to neutral ground. "How's work been, Clayton?" "Oh, he said, smiling at the others. "Busy saving lives, breaking hearts, that kind of thing." The group laughed. I forced a polite smile. Then came the moment that stuck. He leaned back, took a sip of coffee, and looked straight at me. "If she's so smart," he said, nodding toward me, "let's see how long she survives without alerts." There was a second of silence before someone said, "You're dark, man," half amused, half uneasy. The laughter that followed was awkward, but laughter all the same. "And me?" I smiled too. Because that's what I'd learned to do. Smile, so they'd think I could take a joke. But the joke wasn't funny. It was a threat disguised as charm. I didn't know then that my hand had already reached for my phone, screen facing down, voice memo app running. Recording had become instinct, one of the few habits that still made me feel in control. Now, 2 days later, I sat in my room and played that same clip back, the faint static filling the silence around me. His words hit just as hard as they had that night. "If she's so smart, let's see how long she survives without alerts." I heard my own laugh, thin and forced. It wasn't humor, it was survival. The sound of someone pretending not to notice they'd just been warned. I paused the audio and leaned back against the pillow, staring at the reflection of the snow outside. My heart was beating too fast, and the monitor beside me beeped a little louder to prove it. For a long time, I let the quiet stretch. I thought about all the times Clayton had said something cruel and gotten away with it because he'd wrapped it in wit. I thought about Vera's constant excuses for him. That's just how he jokes, Anna. Don't take it personally. It wasn't a joke. It never was. I picked up my phone and opened a message window. My hands shook, but my tone didn't. I attached the audio file and sent it to Vera with a single line, "Listen to what your golden boy said." The reply came 5 minutes later. "It was just a joke, Anna. Don't twist everything into trauma." I stared at those words until they blurred. That phrase, "don't twist everything into trauma," echoed louder than Clayton's voice. Because it wasn't new. It was the family chorus, sung every time someone spoke up. When Mom complained about the hospital staff before she died, they said she was overreacting. When I said the pacemaker alarm cut out, they said I was imagining things. And now, when I had proof, they said it was humor. The tablet chimed. A storm advisory blinked across the screen. High winds, low visibility, stay indoors. I turned off the notification and let my eyes wander to the window again. The snow had thickened into a curtain of white. The world outside was gone. That night, I wrote in my journal. I didn't write much, just what mattered. I've been made the punchline of someone else's experiment. I stared at the words for a while. Then I added another line. Let him joke. I'm done laughing. I uploaded the voice recording to my encrypted drive, the same one holding the footage from Warren. It was slow going, the hospital's network dragged under the storm, but I watched the progress bar inch forward. Once complete, I disconnected everything, even the bedside tablet. My chest tightened, but not from fear. From clarity. I realized that Clayton wasn't the only one playing his little game of survival. I was, too. And I was getting better at it. The lights dimmed automatically at midnight. Outside, wind howled against the glass like it was trying to find a way in. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythm of the beeps pull me under, but before sleep could claim me, I whispered to myself. If he crosses the line again, he'll find me waiting. And if he crossed the line again, I'd be standing right on the other side, waiting. By the time morning seeped through the storm-streaked hospital window, something in me had already changed. Not a flicker. Not a spark. A shift. Something tectonic. The night before had cracked open the kind of truth you don't come back from. And not just the knowledge that Clayton had stolen from me, not just the chilling confirmation that he'd tampered with the software that now sat inside my body like a traitor, but the final, inescapable realization that staying silent made me part of the system that had killed my mother. Silence wasn't safety anymore. It was complicity. I had survived in silence for too long. Now, I was done surviving. I was ready to speak. I waited for the nurse to finish her morning round. She was polite but distracted, tapping away at her tablet, checking vitals like she was ticking off a grocery list. When she asked how I slept, I said fine, with a smile, the kind that hides the storm brewing just under the skin. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, I pushed the hospital-issued tray aside and reached for my laptop. I flipped it open and connected to a network she didn't know existed, a hidden VPN buried in a privacy shell I hadn't touched in 2 years. The login credentials came slowly, like memories dragged from the bottom of a well. But eventually, they came. The cloud archive unfolded like an old diary. Hundreds of folders. Most untouched since my final year of grad school. Some labeled in all caps, others with bad puns only I understood. But one stood out. Auto Alert Prototype, Fall 2015. I clicked. The screen bloomed with familiar files, functional schematics, versioned code trees, embedded test footage, metadata logs. I could hear my younger self again, exhausted, caffeinated, idealistic, dictating bug fixes into her headset at 2 a.m. I remembered that hope. That hunger. We were going to change the world with this. I opened the core module first. The coding structure was sharp, elegant. Mine. The syntax, the logic paths, the architecture, it was all me. Every line carried my rhythm, the way you can always tell a pianist by the way their fingers fall on the keys. And then I saw it. A file that didn't belong. patent_submission.pdf. My heart paused. I clicked it open, already knowing what I would see. There it was, the same sequence flow, the same architecture, the same emergency response loop. Identical, except for the header. Filed by Clayton Art Drexler, September 2016. A year after I archived my original build. It was like watching a ghost wear your face. The air left my lungs in a slow, stunned hush. This wasn't just theft. It was identity theft on a soul-deep level. He hadn't just taken my work, he had taken the last pure thing I had built before life broke me into smaller, quieter pieces. He had stolen the part of me that believed I could make something good and useful. And now that same thing, the software I designed to amplify human warning signs, was being used to mute them. Not accidentally. Deliberately. I should have felt fury. But what I felt instead was cleaner. Colder. It was the clarity of recognition. The acknowledgement that Clayton hadn't just started lying when the patent got filed. He had started rewriting my life long before the pacemaker ever flickered in my chest. He was always erasing me, one success at a time. I pulled out the thumb drive Oren had given me. The small silver one with no label, just a tiny groove at the edge. I connected it and opened the file marked, int.sig log, internal review. And there it was. Clayton's signature embedded in a diagnostic audit of suppressed alerts. The system logs confirmed it, his unique developer ID tied to critical care overrides. Same architecture. Same alert system. Same silence. Only now, it wasn't just theoretical. It had been used. Deployed. It was hiding patient deterioration in real time. How many had suffered? How many had whispered into the void like my mother did, something's wrong. Please believe me, and heard nothing back because their alerts were muted beneath the hum of marketable efficiency. I stared at the screen, and for the first time, I felt something larger than anger. Responsibility. This was no longer just about me. Or her. This was about everyone like us. I opened an old email client I hadn't used in years. An inbox thick with dust and ghosts. Password reset. Security check. Done. And there it was, waiting. Subject, let it go. From Vera. Dated 4 years ago. Anna, please don't push this. He's family. He's doing something with his life. Why do you always have to be the one who fights everything? Just move on. V. I read it 3 times. Not because I needed to understand it, but because I already did. She had known. We had built the first model together. In my apartment, over takeout and too much wine. She had seen me iterate, test, fail, try again. She knew whose code it was. And she chose him anyway. My own sister. I didn't scream. Didn't cry. I just copied the email, attached it to a secure folder, and renamed the document, proof_Vera_2019. Then I opened the hospital's complaint portal. A question blinked at me. Submit anonymously. Yes, no. I hovered. And then I clicked no. No more shadows. No more swallowing the truth to protect the comfort of others. No more whispering into corners that never answered back. I typed in my name. Anna Sterling. Then I began the report. Subject, unauthorized alteration of pacemaker data. Suspect, Clayton R. Drexler. I attached everything, my prototype's metadata, the side-by-side code overlay, the patent submission date, Oren's audit logs, and finally, Vera's email. At the bottom, I wrote a simple, factual statement. The system you are using is based on intellectual property that was developed solely by me. It has since been modified in ways that compromise patient safety. I believe the individual responsible for these changes is using his position to suppress critical alerts in pacemakers and monitoring devices, including the one currently in my body. The pattern aligns with what happened to my mother in 2020, prior to her death. Then I hit submit. A confirmation number appeared. I took a screenshot. Saved it in 3 locations. Printed it out. Filed it beside the only photo I had left of my mother smiling with her eyes wide open. Then I leaned back and listened. The hospital monitor beside me hummed, steady and indifferent. Clayton may have taken my invention. He may have fooled investors and colleagues. He may have rewritten the story they told about us at family dinners. But he hadn't erased me. And now, he was about to learn what it feels like when a stolen narrative is ripped out of your hands and replaced with the truth. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was coming for everything he stole. One file at a time. The hospital room hummed in disinterest. A quiet, clinical rhythm of machines ticking away, like metronomes set to measure absence. The vents whispered heat into the chilled air, and somewhere behind a door that always remained slightly ajar, nurses murmured in the way people do when they don't want to admit they're talking about someone else's pain. It had been 2 days since I submitted the internal complaint about Clayton. 2 full days since I turned in evidence that the golden boy of biomedical software engineering had stolen my code, patented it under his name, and worse, used it to silence the warnings that were supposed to save lives. No reply. No review acknowledgement. Not even an automated thank you. But that night something in me snapped. Not loudly. Not violently. Just a deep internal crack, the kind that lets cold flood in. Outside, the storm had turned into white silence, snow dampening the world like insulation. The kind of quiet that makes your own thoughts echo. And mine wouldn't let go, not of Clayton, not of the lie we'd all been living, and certainly not of my mother's death. Not anymore. I sat up in the stiff hospital bed, blankets tucked like some kind of protective cocoon. The laptop, hospital property, clunky and too warm underneath, rested on my legs. The screen's glow painted the room with ghost light. I didn't hesitate anymore. The credentials were old. Outdated. Her caregiver portal, from before things got really bad. Before she stopped asking questions. I typed the login, once, twice, 3 times. The cursor blinked, and then the system opened up. The files loaded slowly. Months of labs. Scans. Doctor's notes filled with clinical detachment. I could feel her in them, not her presence, but her absence. The way every entry chipped a little more off the woman who raised me. And then I found it. The entry I knew would be there. February 16, 2020. 2:47 a.m. Patient found unresponsive. Code blue initiated. No alarm triggered prior to discovery. Cause, sudden cardiac arrest. That wasn't the truth. Not the whole truth. I remembered that night like it was tattooed behind my eyelids. She had looked at me, really looked, and said, "It's not just pain. It's a warning." She knew her body. She pressed the call button. We waited. No one came. I scrolled deeper into the logs. There it was, heart rate drop. Not full arrest. A significant dip. Logged at 2:38 a.m. 9 minutes before she was found. And then. Alert muted for testing. Muted. Like mine had been. Just 3 nights ago. I froze. The screen blurred for a second before refocusing. Beneath the alert log, metadata displayed the signature of the last developer who modified the alert settings. C. Drexler. Clayton. He hadn't just stolen my prototype. He hadn't just turned it into his own career springboard. He had used it, weaponized it. Cloaked deterioration under the guise of optimization. Made the system blind. Deaf. Mute. He made it lethal. And the world had clapped him on the back for it. Because he was family. Because he smiled like he had nothing to hide. Because his handshake felt safe and his words sounded like truth. But truth doesn't smile. Truth bleeds. I opened a folder she used to update when her hands were strong enough to write. Digital scans of her journal. The entry from 2 days before she died blinked into view. It's not the pain that scares me. It's that no one will believe I'm in it. I broke then, not with tears, but with clarity. A cold, razor-edged thing. Not grief. Not sorrow. Rage. But not the kind that burns everything down. The kind that calculates. I picked up my phone and called Vera. She answered on the second ring, her voice defensive, exhausted, irritated. Anna, it's almost 1 in the morning. I found it, I said, my voice level. Clayton's name. In the update log. He muted Mom's alerts. A long pause. I heard her shift in bed, or maybe just in conscience. I'm not making this up, I said. He did it to her. And now he's doing it to me. Another breath. Then stop making him angry, she said. Everything in me went still. Like the air froze inside my lungs. I'm sorry. I asked, even though I'd heard her. You keep poking him like it's going to change anything, she replied. Just stop. He's not going to hurt you if you leave it alone. That wasn't advice. That was surrender. That's your answer. I whispered. Let the man who killed our mother walk because keeping him happy is more comfortable? She was sick, Vera snapped. She would have died anyway. No, I said. What killed her wasn't her illness. It was everyone pretending her pain wasn't real. She didn't respond. I didn't wait. I hung up. And just like that, my last thread of hope that someone else in the family might want truth unraveled. I wasn't angry with her. I was done needing her. I opened my report. The one I'd started building the night I realized my episode followed the exact same pattern as our mother's. Logs. Screenshots. Side-by-side comparisons of alert failures. A timeline of Clayton's involvement in firmware changes. My original prototype's functionality. The change in parameters. The new default, muted alerts during early warning signs. The medical board might not care about emotion. But they cared about malpractice. And I had proof. Cold. Hard. Irrefutable. I added her journal entry. A human voice in a sea of code. Then I signed it. Anna Sterling. I hit submit. The bar crawled like it was dragging the weight of her story and mine. When it hit 100%, I whispered. Now they'll have to hear us both. I closed the laptop. I leaned back. Outside, the snow didn't stop. It kept falling. Quiet. Steady. Just like the truth. The next time Clayton looked me in the eyes, he wouldn't find fear. He'd find a mirror. By the following night, the blizzard had blanketed everything in white silence. Roads were shut down. Flights cancelled. Even the hospital cafeteria was closed early, with staff moving on skeleton shifts. They weren't letting anyone in or out, not even visitors. I could feel it in my skin, something final about that kind of lockdown. Not medical. Strategic. I waited until after 11 p.m. to move. The hallway outside my door was empty, lit in that sickly overhead glow hospitals seemed to favor during graveyard hours. My body still ached, but not from sickness. From tension. My muscles were tight, clenched for days, waiting for a strike I knew was coming. It was time to face the one name I hadn't said aloud in over 3 years, Kieran Voss. I found him near the East Nurses Station, half shadowed by a flickering light, hovering over a tablet like he wished he could crawl inside it. When he saw me, he tensed. "Anara," he said, voice clipped. "What are you doing up?" "I could ask you the same," I replied. He didn't answer. Just looked back down, pretending the screen held something more interesting than the woman whose research had made him relevant once upon a time. "I saw your name on the contributor list," I said, stepping closer. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "It wasn't my fight." "That's convenient." He exhaled, sharp and quiet. "Look, I didn't know what Clayton was planning. And when I found out, I figured it wasn't worth going to war over. You'd already left the program. No one was going to believe you." "You believed me," I said. He didn't argue. "That told me everything." "I'm not asking you to testify," I added. "I'm asking you to remember what integrity used to mean." His mouth twisted like he'd tasted something bitter. He said if I spoke up, he'd bury me. Blacklist me. The guy knows people, Anna. Real ones. Government ones. And what if I told you he already buried someone? Kieran froze. "My mother died from a muted alert. Same software you two helped develop." His face drained of color. He didn't speak. He didn't even shake his head. Just turned and walked away without a single word. The silence he left behind hit harder than a slap. Back in my room, the air felt thicker. I could smell the antiseptic more acutely, like the walls were bleeding chemicals to keep me quiet. An hour passed before I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't loud, just 2 soft raps, like someone checking if I was awake without really wanting me to be. When I opened it, she stood there, smaller than I remembered, bundled in a winter coat, a scarf loose around her neck. "Dr. Ruth?" I whispered. She nodded once. "I shouldn't be here." I let her in. She handed me a manila envelope without ceremony. "Your mother tried to file this," she said. "It got pushed down, buried in internal review. They told her it was a systems error. But it wasn't. It was deliberate." I opened the folder. Inside were pages of logged reports, signed memos, time-stamped incident charts, diagnostic records. One in particular caught my eye: alert override manually executed at 2:37 a.m. That was 1 minute before my mom's vitals plummeted. I looked up, eyes blurring. "Why now?" "Because you didn't stop. And because I've watched good women get erased too many times." Her voice was low, raw. "You're not the first. But I hope you're the last." She left without another word. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling over the folder. I felt something then, not fear, not grief. Something deeper. Resolve. I was done reacting. I was building the wall brick by brick. Clayton thought he could intimidate me with silence. But I was learning how to weaponize mine. At 3:12 a.m., I finally tried to sleep. I turned off the lights, checked the monitor one last time, then closed my eyes. I don't know how long I was out. But when I woke up, the tray beside me had changed. There, next to a lukewarm glass of water and my untouched dinner, was a red apple, peeled and sliced. Carefully arranged. Deliberate. A note sat folded underneath the plate. In neat, calculated handwriting, it read, "Good girls don't test people twice." My heart kicked against my ribs. I didn't scream. I didn't call the nurse. I just stared at it. Because the message wasn't about the fruit. It was about my mother. The last meal she ate was a sliced red apple. This wasn't just a message. It was a threat. Clayton had been in my room. Or someone working for him. He wanted me to know that he could reach me. Even here. Even now. But he'd made a mistake. He assumed I was still the girl who smiled to keep peace. The woman who shut down rather than confront. But that Anna was gone. By sunrise, I had installed an audio sensor under the bed frame, synced to a cloud-based security loop that Oren had quietly helped me encrypt 2 days prior. I connected it to a private relay that triggered automatic uploads every 4 hours to an external server. If someone entered my room again, they wouldn't leave unheard. And if the monitor failed once more, the recording wouldn't just disappear into some corrupted hospital system. It would go live. Later that morning, I opened my journal and wrote a single line. This is no longer about fear. It's about justice. And survival on my terms. And when the alarm finally failed again, I'd be the one watching. The morning after the apple, I didn't wake to panic. I woke with purpose. The monitor still beeped its steady rhythm beside me, but I didn't glance at it. I didn't need to. I had spent the night listening to every word Clayton had spoken, capturing it, storing it, preparing it for the world to hear. He thought he was playing God. But I'd hardwired the heavens to record him. By the time the sun cracked through the blizzard-muted skyline, I had already transferred the latest audio files onto a secure drive and encrypted them. I left no trace on the hospital's network. Oren had taught me how to hide signals in plain sight. It was fitting, really, his silence had taught me how to speak differently. I was ready. And right on schedule, Clayton walked into my hospital room like he owned the floor. No knock. Just swagger. He was wearing one of his fitted jackets, charcoal gray. No visitor badge. Just the confidence of someone who had always gotten away with it. "Morning, sunshine," he said casually, pulling up a chair. I said nothing. "Come on now," he continued, leaning forward. "Don't be like that. We both know you like a little drama. Always have." I tilted my head, calm. "What do you want?" "Just checking in. Saw your name come up in a few departmental notes. Thought I'd make sure you weren't making any unfortunate waves." "You mean waves of truth?" He smirked. "You always did take things personally. You weren't in danger, Anra. I just wanted to see how far you'd go. How you'd react. It was an experiment, that's all." I stared at him, unmoving. "Don't act like you've never manipulated data," he added. "We both know the system is rigged. Sometimes you've got to work around it." "You disabled a critical alert system on a medical device," I said. "That's not working around anything. That's gambling with someone's life." He shrugged. "Well, you didn't die. So, win-win, right?" I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because every word he'd just said was already uploading to the secure server, live. And he had no idea. He stood, smoothing the crease in his jacket. Don't make this personal, Anna. You're emotional. Always have been. The more you fight, the worse you look. Then he left. I didn't stop him. An hour later, I was wheeled into the hospital's ethics board hearing. Vera was already there, sitting rigid in the third row, lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't spoken to me since that night I told her Clayton was behind Mom's silence. She didn't even look up when I was rolled into the room. The board members sat at a long oak table, each holding thick folders filled with policy memos, testimony requests, and procedural summaries. Clayton stood near the head of the room, polished, practiced. He introduced himself with ease. I'm here as a concerned specialist. Ms. Sterling has been under emotional stress, and unfortunately, it's clouded her judgment. I almost laughed. Then I saw Vera stand. Everyone turned toward her. She cleared her throat and pulled her phone from her coat pocket. Before this continues, I'd like to play a recording from a family meeting held here at Reedridge 3 months ago. Clayton's eyes twitched. She pressed play. His voice filled the room. If she dies, at least she'll prove a point, right? Gasps rippled through the audience. One board member dropped his pen. Another whispered to a colleague. Clayton's smirk collapsed. Vera turned toward him slowly. You always thought it was just a joke. But people die from jokes like yours. I couldn't breathe for a moment, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I had been waiting for someone in my family to finally choose truth over tradition. It was happening. After the hearing adjourned, I found Vera in the hallway. Why now? I asked. She looked tired. Her lipstick was smudged, and her shoulders hunched the way people do when they've finally let go of a weight they carried for years. Because you were right, she said. And because if I stayed silent one more time, I'd never forgive myself. I didn't hug her. I just nodded. It was enough, for now. Outside the courtroom, the wind had softened. The snow was beginning to melt. Puddles formed along the edges of the sidewalk where the salt had done its job. I took it as a sign. That afternoon, as I was being wheeled back to my room, a woman in a black coat intercepted the nurse. She held a badge. Not hospital. Camera Lowell, FBI. She turned to me and offered a soft, steady look. We've been monitoring Mr. Drexler's activities for some time. The data you submitted, especially the live audio, confirms what we feared. We're launching a formal investigation into every hospital that uses his firmware. 3 states. Maybe more. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She handed me a sealed letter, then disappeared down the corridor like she'd never been there at all. Back in my room, I was handed a new patient intake form. At the top, in bold, it read, Patient status, monitored under Federal Witness Protection Protocol. I stared at it for a long time, then smiled for the first time in weeks. That evening, after the hallway lights dimmed and the cleaning crew had come and gone, I left a single note in the hallway outside the research lab. Folded. Slipped into the crack of Clayton's locker. You tested me. But I wrote the final code. But even when justice is served, silence doesn't always leave the room. It's strange how silence lingers, even after everything's been said. 6 months had passed since the day the courtroom fell quiet. Since Vera stood, voice steady, and ended decades of denial with a single recording. Since Clayton's smirk collapsed under the weight of his own words. The silence that followed wasn't relief. It was residue. The kind that sticks to your ribs. Spring had come late to Denver. Snow still clung to the edges of sidewalks like it didn't want to leave either. But the ice was thinning. So was the fear. I now lived in a small apartment on the 7th floor of an old brick building downtown. Nothing fancy. But it had a view of the city's edge, and at night, I could see the flicker of hospital lights in the distance. Some people would have called that morbid. To me, it felt like control. I'd been meeting with a trauma counselor once a week. Her name was Judith. She never wore perfume, never asked me to retell the whole story at once. Just small pieces. She let the truth come out at its own pace, like steam through a cracked window. One afternoon, she asked, "Do you think you've forgiven him?" I looked at the cup of tea in my hands. It's not about forgiveness. It's about remembering the moment I stopped needing it. She nodded, didn't push further. Later that day, back home, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk where the letter had sat since it arrived 4 months ago. The envelope was cream-colored, neatly typed. Federal inmate mail. Clayton Drexler, inmate 217364. 25 years, no parole. Convicted on counts of medical tampering, conspiracy to defraud the U.S. healthcare system, and reckless endangerment resulting in death. I hadn't opened the letter. Not because I feared what it said, but because I didn't need to give it the oxygen. Still, I couldn't throw it away either. It sat in that drawer, quiet as a boundary. A reminder of the line that had been crossed, and how I chose not to cross back. That evening, just before dusk, Vera called. It was the first time in weeks. She texted once or twice, mostly forwarding articles about FDA tech regulation or congratulating me when my name appeared in an editorial about whistleblowers. But this call felt different. I answered. "Hey," she said. "Hey." A pause. "I was in therapy today," she continued, her voice less polished than usual. "I told my counselor I should have stood up sooner." I waited. "I don't expect you to say anything," she added. "I just thought you should know." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out at the thinning snow, the trees beginning to bud, cautiously. "I appreciate you saying it," I finally said. "That's enough. We weren't sisters mended. But we weren't enemies either." And that, too, was enough. Weeks passed. I started working again, not at a hospital, not in a lab, but with a federal design team focused on post-trauma medical protocols. They called it the Resilience Project. I called it Ruth's Blueprint. The new pacemaker system we built had no silent mode. Every alert required a manual override by 2 parties, logged and time-stamped, auditable by an external system. We called it the Ruth Protocol. I cried the first time I saw it printed on a device casing. It didn't bring my mother back. But it made sure no one else would whisper into a void like she had. That mattered. Some nights, after the world had quieted, I'd sit on my bed and listen to the gentle rhythm of the monitor I still wore, by choice. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me how close things had come. I'd turn off the lights, pull the blanket to my chest, and let the beeping lull me into sleep. Steady. Consistent. Alive. One evening, just as I settled in, the machine let out a soft chime, just a test ping. I smiled. It worked. I reached for my journal, opened to the last page, and wrote, "I'm still here." Not because they saved me, but because I saved myself. I closed the book. Outside, the last snowflake of the season drifted past my window, disappearing before it hit the sill. There's a new silence now, not one of danger, but of peace. And I earned every second of it. In the end, this story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming your voice when everyone around you tries to silence it. Anura's journey reminds us that even when justice is served, the scars of betrayal don't simply vanish. So ask yourself, What would you do if the people meant to protect you were the ones pulling the plug? If this story made you feel something, anger, empathy, or even empowerment, leave a comment below.